10 years have passed since the financial genius of our time disappeared from the world stage, leaving behind a fortune estimated at hundreds of billions of dollars and complete silence. This was no ordinary disappearance. It was the destruction of a legend, the erasure of an entire era. On December 12, 2010, Satoshi Nakamoto's message landed in the developer's mailbox and froze there like an icy ghost. It was his last message. There was no farewell, no explanation. Suddenly, there was silence, as if the world had frozen after he had done something that changed the financial landscape forever. Behind this person or group of people was not just innovative technology, but a fortune that was estimated at millions at the time of creation and now exceeded $100 billion. His personal capital, amounting to about 1 million bitcoins, remained untouched, stored in digital wallets, like a monument keeping a secret. The world knew him only by his nickname, and behind that name lay either exceptional genius or something frightening. How did the creator of the most powerful financial instrument renounce power and immense wealth? Why did he allow his name and fortune to dissolve into digital space? This was not just a simple escape. It was an act of self-denial, or, more likely, a rejection of power caused by the very system he himself had invented. The search for Satoshi turned into a ghost hunt where every detail discovered only complicated the mystery. It remained to be understood how he managed to create perfection and how that same perfection ultimately consumed him. This is how the story began of the man who gave the world digital currency and disappeared, leaving behind only its key. His silence is valued more than all the digital gold he ever created. This is the story of how a genius dissolved into his own invention. In 2008, financial markets faced serious turbulence, leading to a search for new decentralized solutions. Trust in traditional financial institutions was undermined, and with it, confidence in the stability of currencies. At this critical moment, on October 31, 2008, a message from Satoshi Nakamoto arrived on the cypherpunks mailing list. The mysterious author left the document without fanfare, a 9-page file titled Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. No one knew who he was, and no one paid much attention to him. Inside was a mathematically precise and elegant concept offering a solution to the problem of double spending, without an intermediary, without a bank. This concept, like a foundation, was thrown into the abyss of the global recession. The clue that investigators, who years later set out to unravel Nakamoto's identity, found in this document turned out to be the first and very fragile one. The perfect English used in it was marked by certain linguistic markers indicating British origin. The words were used in a style and spelling characteristic of the British. It was the first, barely noticeable clue that hinted at geography. However, the genius behind the concept would hardly have made such an obvious mistake without calculating it in advance. Perhaps it was a deliberate red herring, or perhaps it was the only slip-up by a man too absorbed in building his digital fortress. On January 9, 2009, Satoshi launched his network by creating the so-called Genesis block, the first block in the history of the blockchain. His code contained a message that was not understood by everyone, but only by a select few. The Times newspaper, January 3, 2009, Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. It was a symbolic act, linking his decentralized creation to a moment of financial instability. This demonstrated not only Nakamoto's technical genius, but also his strong political motivation. Over the course of a year, the project developed, and Satoshi actively collaborated with other developers, notably Gavin Andresen. Andresen eventually began to notice some peculiarities in Satoshi's behavior. Correspondence with him often took place between midnight and 5 a.m. GMT. This led to speculation that Satoshi was either European or American, working non-standard hours. His communication style was concise and precise. He paid no attention to praise or philosophical discussions about the prospects of Bitcoin. All his energy was focused on fixing bugs and improving the code. In early summer 2010, Nakamoto began to distance himself from the project. He handed over control of the code repository and network alert keys to Andresen. It was a formal but completely new step. No one anticipated that the project's creator would leave while Bitcoin was still in its early stages of development. On April 26, 2010, Nakamoto wrote, "I will be doing other things. Bitcoin is in good hands with Gavin and others." It was said without a hint of regret or pride, as if it were an entry in a regular work log. During this period, Satoshi's shadow became particularly dense for investigators. He did not sell a single Bitcoin, did not turn the idea into profit, did not receive any personal gain. His fortune remained untouched, frozen in unspent wallets. This situation ruled out the motive of greed. He was left with only two options: either live in fear of exposure and persecution by the state, or realize that as soon as his name became known, his creation, built on anonymity and decentralization, would lose its essence. He understood that the system could only exist if its creator disappeared. He ceased his public activities, sacrificing his name for the sake of the ideal of decentralization. With Nakamoto's silent departure at the end of 2010, the developers' focus shifted to code management. At the same time, in the financial world, this silence was taken as a signal to start the hunt. By 2011, when the price of Bitcoin stabilized at around $1 and then began to rise rapidly, journalists and private investigators realized the scale of the digital wealth left behind by its creator. Millions of untouched coins resting in wallets became a monumental challenge for cryptographers. Investigators sought not only the name, but also an answer to the question of how such a vast fortune could be simply left unattended. In 2013, the first serious lead was Nick Szabo, a cryptographer and developer. His work on creating bit gold in the late 1990s contained virtually all of the fundamental principles that were later implemented in Bitcoin. Independent researchers who conducted linguistic analysis found striking stylistic similarities between Satoshi's scientific papers and public communications, especially in the use of compound sentences and rare technical terms. This clue, pointing to an academic background, seemed the most likely of all. However, Szabo categorically denied any connection to the case, responding to journalists' inquiries with the same cold and reserved brevity as Nakamoto, which only fueled suspicion. In March 2014, the investigation reached its peak. Journalist Leah McGrath Goodman claimed in an article for Newsweek that she had uncovered the mystery, naming Dorian Prentice Nakamoto, a 74-year-old Japanese engineer living in California. She came to this conclusion not only because his full name matched the pseudonym, but also because of his mysterious past, marked by work in the defense industry. Goodman cornered the old man at his home and got him to say something she interpreted as a confession. "I'm no longer involved in this and I can't discuss anything." This news caused a real stir around Dorian, turning his life into a media nightmare. Soon, however, it became clear that Dorian Nakamoto had nothing to do with cryptography, and his words had been taken out of context and referred to his previous work. It was a painful failure of investigation that exposed the danger of the public's thirst for sensation, which can cause serious harm to an innocent person, while the culprit remains unpunished. At the same time, parallel to this, technical experts conducted a more in-depth investigation, studying the so-called Satoshi pattern, the mining algorithm used to mine the first batch of 1 million coins. An analysis of the timestamps revealed that Satoshi had used an extremely complex and optimized algorithm that ensured efficient block mining with minimal delays. This fact indicated that Satoshi was not just a theorist, but an outstanding practical cryptographer capable of developing extremely complex software. This only added to the tragedy of his disappearance. The system did not destroy him, but made him too important, too threatening to itself. His fate was sealed. He was doomed to oblivion as soon as his brainchild began to function. After the failure with Dorian Nakamoto, the investigation took a darker turn. It became clear that the only way to find a person who had so masterfully hidden himself on the network using fake linguistic traces and complete anonymity was through his real connections or by monetizing the project. The focus was on developers and scientists who possessed the knowledge necessary to create the Bitcoin system, of whom there were only a few dozen worldwide. Among them were such notable figures as Wei Dai, creator of the B-money system that preceded Bitcoin, and Adam Back, inventor of Hashcash. Like Nick Szabo, they all denied any direct connection to the creation of Bitcoin, but their work served as the intellectual foundation for Satoshi's creation. In 2016, a new sensational figure emerged. Australian businessman and computer scientist Craig Wright claimed to be Satoshi Nakamoto. He presented journalists and Gavin Andresen, the chief trustee of the missing founder, with cryptographic evidence that Wright claimed proved his control over the keys to early crypto wallets. As a result of Wright's persistence and technical presentations, Andresen publicly stated his belief that Wright was Satoshi. This event was a turning point, as it was the first time in many years that Bitcoin's chief developer had acknowledged the creator of the cryptocurrency. Wright's victory was short-lived. The cryptographic community, which met his statements with skepticism, demanded that he publicly sign a message using the Genesis key, as this was the only convincing proof of his ownership. Wright, having previously promised to do so, suddenly refused, explaining that he no longer intended to prove his identity. The evidence he presented was soon exposed as fake, with manipulations of dates and code discovered among it. Instead of shedding light on the mystery, Craig Wright compounded it by turning himself into a controversial figure who dared to take on someone else's legend. After that, the investigation took on a new direction. Instead of journalistic investigations, courts initiated by Wright's partners took center stage. One such lawsuit was initiated by the brother of his deceased business partner, Dave Kleiman, who claimed the right to half of Satoshi's fortune, arguing that Bitcoin was created jointly by them. This lawsuit was the first legal recognition of the existence and value of Nakamoto's million coins. The years-long court case turned into an unprecedented cryptographic investigation. The court had to determine whether Wright really had the keys that he claimed to have lost or destroyed. The investigation revealed that Satoshi, regardless of his identity, was extremely careful in removing digital traces. Experts hired by the court determined that Satoshi's early wallets never ran on standard operating systems or used conventional email clients. Communication was carried out using encrypted protocols and anonymous proxy servers. All attempts to link his code to specific files or dates were unsuccessful. This indicated that his anonymity was not accidental, but rather a well-thought-out and multi-layered defense. The mystery that investigators were trying to unravel began to take shape. Satoshi Nakamoto did not simply disappear out of fear. His disappearance was the result of the completion of his mission, and maintaining anonymity was the only way to guarantee Bitcoin's decentralization and independence from control. If he had shown himself, governments, banks, and regulators would have attempted to neutralize him, seeking either to buy his silence or to destroy him. He chose the path of self-sacrifice. His fortune, 1 million bitcoins, became his eternal monument to anonymity in the digital world, a constant reminder that ideals are more important than material goods. Since Bitcoin reached its historic peak in value in 2018, the search for Satoshi has ceased to be the subject of journalistic investigations and has become a task for large companies specializing in chain analysis, such as Chainalysis. These companies, acting on behalf of governments and financial institutions, focused their efforts on the only sure clue, the blockchain itself. They did not need a name. They needed to be sure that Nakamoto's million coins were a single asset, and that it was under control or ready to be moved, which could cause the market to collapse. Using advanced heuristic algorithms, the experts conducted a thorough analysis of the Satoshi pattern. As a result, they confirmed that the first blocks were mined with surprising regularity, with minimal downtime between mining sessions. This regularity allowed them to designate a so-called exclusion zone around these wallets. It became clear that the coins in these wallets would never be used unless their owner intended to provoke a global financial collapse. The key discovery was that none of the transactions from this zone were linked to other known or suspicious operations on the network. This ruled out the possibility of a sale or an attempt at anonymous transfer. Satoshi didn't just disappear, he built a digital oasis for his wealth. In 2020, the Kleiman v. Wright lawsuit reached its peak, becoming the central battle for Nakamoto's digital legacy. Throughout the hearings, Craig Wright stubbornly insisted that only he had access to the encrypted files storing the keys to the fund. The judges and jurors were faced with an unusual task. They had to decide the issue of ownership based on the testimony of a person who was unable to provide proof of ownership in the form of a cryptographic signature. As a result, the court rejected most of Wright's claims, ruling that he had failed to provide convincing evidence of his ownership. However, the court ordered Wright to transfer about half of the disputed fortune to Kleiman. Although the legal system was unable to locate Satoshi or verify his identity, it recognized his virtual property as the subject of disputes and lawsuits for the first time, clearly demonstrating the real value of his missing fortune. This legal failure only reinforced the existing myth. If Satoshi were alive and had the keys, he could resolve all disputes with a wave of his hand. His absence at this critical moment, when his name appeared in multi-billion-dollar lawsuits, was the most eloquent testimony to his self-denial. He remained true to the principle laid down at the very beginning of Bitcoin. His brainchild should exist independently, without a centralized leader. Since 2012, the tragedy of Nakamoto's disappearance has taken on the character of criminal and state incidents. As a completely new instrument, Bitcoin faced regulatory difficulties and, unfortunately, was quickly adopted by unscrupulous individuals and organizations for purposes incompatible with its creator's original vision. This was the first test for Satoshi's idealistic concept. Governments urgently needed a way to control it, and the creator's complete anonymity posed a direct threat to them. During the operation to shut down Silk Road, the Federal Bureau of Investigation was faced with the need to get to the root of the problem. The fight against crime inevitably led them to the conclusion that in order to be successful, they would have to understand and possibly neutralize the creator of the cryptocurrency itself. The arrest of Ross Ulbricht, founder of the black market, and the seizure of thousands of bitcoins in 2013 were a striking example of this. The state demonstrated its power, but at the same time failed to get to the source of the criminal network. This circumstance created a situation in which, if Satoshi Nakamoto were alive, he would have to go into hiding, as his knowledge of the system would pose a serious problem for global regulators and authorities. The most disturbing aspect of this story is the figure of Gavin Andresen. Shortly after Satoshi's disappearance, Andresen, as the chief developer of Bitcoin, attracted the attention of the U.S. intelligence services. He repeatedly made public statements about meetings with intelligence officials, where he had to comment on the Bitcoin code and its possible threats to national security. His speeches, full of restraint and brevity, hinted at enormous pressure. Andresen was effectively the only link between the anonymous world and the world of government agencies. At the same time, he never disclosed Satoshi's personal data, remaining true to his ideals. This situation eloquently testified to the fact that the system created by Satoshi caused not only concern among banks, but also close attention from law enforcement and intelligence agencies. At the end of the story, eternal, immovable wealth awaits us. Satoshi's million coins became a kind of digital bomb planted at the heart of the global financial system. Every time Bitcoin reaches new heights, the market shudders at the same question: what will happen if these coins become active? If Satoshi had simply disappeared, his fortune could have been forgotten. But his digital silence, full of mystery and potential, acts as an active factor of fear. This is the most perfect, but at the same time, the saddest example of anonymity. He dissolved himself to ensure the life of his brainchild, but the price was enormous. He left the key to his fortune so that no one could find him. The tragedy of Satoshi Nakamoto is that he successfully accomplished his mission by creating a decentralized system, but this victory made him the main enemy of all global institutions. His ingenious brainchild came to life, and his own personality had to dissolve so as not to violate the principles of decentralization. The $1 million that turned into $100 billion became not a fortune for him, but a curse, an eternal burden that locked him in an ideal cage of anonymity. His eternal life became an idea, but he himself withdrew from the public eye. The mystery of his disappearance will forever remain the most valuable and elusive enigma in history.